in the nuclear war that was expected. But neither Manson nor Jones imagined possessing nuclear weapons. They saw themselves as victims. After living with nuclear weapons for half a century, and they're becoming more technologically advanced and miniaturized, we can now, in small groups, can imagine possessing them. And I call this the trickle-down effects of nuclear weapons, or trickle-down nuclearism. It's the only Reagan term I ever used.
We might move into disarmament projects, anti-militarism projects. This is where Phase 2 comes into play. It's basically an expansion of the teams, expansion of the group focuses, and basically making an organization as such through the interconnection of these different groups with interrelated focuses. Interdisciplinary is a good word.
It is interesting to note that the editors and publishers were, to a man, all supporters of the infamous Fair Play for Cuba Committee. According to King's biographer and sympathizer, David J. Garrow, quote, King privately described himself as a Marxist, close quote. In his 1981 book, The FBI and Martin Luther King Jr., Garrow quotes King as saying in SCLC staff meetings, quote, "We have moved into a new era, which must be an era of revolution. The whole structure of American life must be changed. We are engaged in the class struggle," close quote. Jewish communist Stanley Levison can best be described as King's behind-the-scenes handler. Levison, who had for years been in charge of the secret funneling of Soviet funds to the Communist Party USA, was King's mentor and was actually the brains behind many of King's more successful ploys. It was Levison who edited King's book, Stride Toward Freedom. It was Levison who arranged for a publisher. Levison even prepared King's income tax returns. It was Levison who really controlled the fundraising and agitation activities of the SCLC. Levison wrote many of King's speeches. King described Levison as one of his closest friends. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, which at that time still included some American patriots, had for many years been aware of Stanley Levison's communist activities. It was Levison's close association with King that brought about the initial FBI interest in King. Lest you be tempted to believe the controlled media's lie about racists in the FBI being out to get King, you should be aware that the man most responsible for the FBI's probe of King was Assistant Director William C. Sullivan. Sullivan describes himself as a liberal and says that initially, quote, "I was 100% for King, because I saw him rising as an effective and badly needed leader for the black people in their desire for civil rights," close quote. The probe of King not only confirmed the FBI's suspicions about King's communist beliefs and associations, but it also revealed King to be a hypocrite, a degenerate, and a charlatan.
So you've made it your business to change people's perception.
Try to. I don't know that I can do that.
Okay, but I'm interested in what made you suddenly go from being, say, a designer of helicopters or a consultant to the motion picture industry to basically creating a new world.
That's later. That was later on. But when I was a kid, the Depression forced people to ask new questions. How come there was a depression? How come the banks failed? They never asked those questions until the Depression. And every university had students outside discussing communism, socialism, fascism. They were discussing things because conditions drove them to that. It isn't that people suddenly became intellectually bright. Conditions forced that. So I noticed that. So I listened to Nazis. They had the American flag and the swastika. During the Depression, they were talking about how great National Socialism was. Then I listened to socialists, and I asked questions. I said, how will you prevent corruption? They didn't have any answers. Then there was a guy speaking on communism, mankind united, all kinds of ideas, back to the good old days, people growing their own food. But I was standing in front of a communist, and he said, "Beat it, son." I was just a kid, because there are mostly adults around. I said, "No, I want to hear what you've got to say." He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I don't believe what the Republicans say about the Democrats or what the Democrats say about the Republicans. I want to hear from a communist what communism is." He said, "You can stay." So after about an hour, I said, "I want to ask you 10,000 questions." He said, "You'll have to go to the YCL." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Young Communist League." I said, "Where are they?" And he gave me an address, and I went there. And there were kids about 10 years old to 17, and they were reading Dostoevsky's book, such as Crime and Punishment, 10-year-olds. They were much brighter than the average child I've ever met. And I stayed there for about an hour. Then I asked the questions. How are you going to prevent corruption in the future? They said, "Well, when that time comes, we'll work on it." How are you going to house the masses? "Well, we'll work on that when that time comes." I said, "Let's start a technical branch and work on those problems." So the lead guy said to me, "You're deviating from the teachings of Marx. You'll have to leave." I said, "I didn't come here to hurt anybody. I came here to help. I would help any group of people." So the vice president of the Young Communist League got up and said, "Let's hear him out." And they kicked us both out. So that was the end of my attempt to reach the communists.
According to Assistant Director Sullivan, who had direct access to the surveillance files on King, which are denied the American people, King had embezzled or misapplied substantial amounts of money contributed to the civil rights movement.
The issues I want to point out very quickly: we advocate no money. People sometimes don't understand why. Okay, so no money. You go up to somebody and they say, "Oh yeah, the Zeitgeist Movement, they advocate no money." And they might ask why. The reason we advocate no money is on multiple levels. The reason is on multiple levels. But here's the most influential one. It is utterly paralyzing because money creates established institutions. Money creates institutions that are forced, for their own survival, to perpetuate themselves. Therefore, progress is inhibited by money more than it is accelerated by it. I'll say that again. Money serves as an incentive, only to a certain degree. Once you build an establishment, you have lots of people working for you, doesn't matter how honest or genuine you think you might be. The moment you have that type of establishment, and the moment something comes along to challenge whatever your advocation is that you make money off of, you're going to have a natural propensity to want to restrict the development of anything that might take away your market share.